Hi, can you hear me? Thanks for having me. Pretty excited to be here. Thanks for the kind introduction. So I'm going to keep it very short from my side. I have a few slides, and looks like the partying crowd is still coming in. So we are all past the partying age, I'm guessing, or party hard and then still come over. Luckily, the traffic was not that bad. We were able to make all the way from Sarjapur to here in 40 minutes. So hopefully, we'll see more people coming. So excited to be here. I'm going to cover a few things, quick overview of Accel, just to set the context because that helps in defining, or at least the rest of the talk will be relevant. And then I have a few slides, a couple of slides on a macro overview of India and how we look at it, and then a few sectors that are exciting from an investment perspective. This is particularly as it relates to Accel, but probably speaks for the venture capital ecosystem as well. And then maybe one couple of slides on what makes an interesting startup from an investor's point of view with one case study. Okay, that's the broad outline. So this is the Accel home screen that Accel has. It's a global platform with offices in US, UK, and India. So these are some of the companies that we are fortunate to invest in. Most of these investments were the first investments, venture capital investments into these companies. And this has global platform, but you can see companies specific to India as well. Right, so coming to the India team here, we've been investing in India for more than 10 years, and we have slightly more than 500 million under management and north of 100 companies focused only on India, or companies, startups out of India serving the globe. We'll talk about some of these as we go along. What's probably not known much is 70% of our investments start out as seed investments. These are the first investments into the company. And we tend to invest anywhere from a few $100,000 to $1 million or more as the initial investment, and tend to support the company through their life cycle, normally investing north of $10 million in any one company. Right, so that's across 4 funds that we have raised over the past 10 years. We have a whole team here of investors as well as operating partners who go in. Some of them are product experts, technology experts, hiring experts, marketing experts, and finance and legal to go work with these seed stage startups. We have a small space for about 150 people that's always packed with some of our very young startups, less than 10 people, to help them settle in faster, not worry about getting a place or paying telephone bills and all these things. Just get going fast, and then as they scale, we also are excited to see them leave that facility as soon as possible. Right, so that's a quick overview. These are some of our flagship investments across sectors. We'll talk about what sectors that we are interested in. So we were the first institutional investors in most of these companies, and seed investors in 4 of the 5 sectors. Right, so Book My Show, Flipkart, Freshdesk, which is in global SaaS. We'll talk about that shortly. The others are consumer brands, and hopefully many of you are using it. I'm excited to hear you use Ola and Swiggy, and hopefully some of these others. Excellent, good. All of you should. Great. My wife uses Myntra all the time, so she says I'm helping test out your startups. I said you can test out the others, and Bluestone and other things like that. Right, so with that, if you want, we can make this interactive. If you have questions, you can stop me as well, especially if you have any clarifying questions, and then we'll have enough time for Q&A. Now, going into the macro overview of India, how we look at India and what makes it so exciting for Accel to be investing in India. So this gives a quick overview of how we look at India and what's the India that we are actually currently going after. So the top of the pyramid of India has 2 categories. One is called elite, with incomes greater than $25,000, or affluence in the $5,000 to $25,000 range. Right, so these are all dollars because these are numbers that we show to our investors who are mostly from outside of India. So that's why it's in dollars, obviously. Right, so then the next billion comes in. So if you look at the Indian startups so far, investors are focused in the top of the pyramid as your top and or closer to the vertex there. But there are 73 million households that belong to this top and contributing to $1.3 trillion of our economy. Right, so it is a very large portion. It's very unfortunate that the majority or the bulk of India is still here. But the picture on the right is a little bit more encouraging. They say by 2020, and this is data from a lot of sources that we've collated together, right? By 2020, we expect more than 100 million families to be in this top portion of the sector, and even the middle to the bottom is growing pretty fast into the topper, into more affordable spaces where they have expendable income. So, but we see that in the near term, the top of the pyramid is where startup opportunities exist the most, with short-term viable business models that can be built and scalable companies can come out of this ecosystem, right? So, and what does this mean in terms of, yes, that could be a large market, but how accessible is this market? So this is what has changed in the last 10 years, right? So since at least I've been tracking India closely, I moved about 6 years back to India and started investing, but I grew up in India, went out of the country and came back, right? So I had a very cushy job in Boston, was a venture capital investor and comfortably settled there. But that's when I realized the real place of innovation is going to be India 10, 20 years out. So I took the leap of faith and said, we have to move as a family, and we moved back to India. And I'm very happy that happened, because if you look, most of these numbers, when I started tracking India, India had 100 million cell phones when I was looking to started my research about moving back to India. And now, if you look, we have close to 1 billion mobile users, but about 600 million mobile users. But what's more exciting is 200 million of them are on smartphones, right? And many of them are on social media, and most of them access their social media through their mobile phones. What does this all mean in terms of I had one more slide here which has gone, which I've removed. But one evolution that has happened over the last few years is, initially most of our users got trained by Gmail and Google with search, right? That was 5-6 years back. And more recently, you saw the rise of WhatsApp and Facebook and all that. So that has made technology accessible almost to everyone. And what Ola and Flipkart of the world have done is not only accessing the internet and using it, but also to be more comfortable transacting. That's something that has changed over the last 3-4 years. In fact, what used to take 3 to 4 years to scale a company from, let's say, 0 to tens of thousands of transactions is now, in the Swiggies of the world, the latest generation of companies, happening in less than 12 months. So that is a very positive sign from the Indian startup ecosystem point of view, that scale is happening much faster. Yes, you have a question? Yeah.
So I have a question on the last. Thanks. Very, very interesting and very concise way of understanding what's.
Sure.
The very interesting and concise way of putting it. I will make one request of sharing the PPT if you can.
Sure. Yeah.
So I have one. Do you have a data point? So this active mobile social users, this 120 million number.
Yeah.
I believe a huge portion of this would be contributed by WhatsApp.
And Facebook.
WhatsApp and Facebook.
Yeah.
So if I were to, I'm just trying to think aloud with you. If I were to try and ask you that, do you have a number of app download? How many unique app downloaders are there who have downloaded more than 2 apps or something on a mobile phone?
How many people have more than 2 apps on a mobile phone?
Beyond social apps. Do you have the sense of that number? For example, let us say a person may have a Facebook and a WhatsApp but may not have a Flipkart.
Right.
Okay. Or a person may have a Facebook and a WhatsApp, may not have a Book My Show. So I just want to know, where is the needle moving between a person being said that, hey, he's just an active mobile social user versus an active mobile app user kind of a thing? I'm just
good question. See, active mobile social user is more for communication purposes, and that's the most that's happening. If you look at even the top apps, right, or the top user base, that's still in the tens of millions, not the 100 million plus. So transaction-based users, or even in the largest of sites, is probably 50 million plus of these 120 million. Does that answer your question? How many of them overlap and use, let's say, a Book My Show and a Flipkart and WhatsApp and all? I'm not sure. I can get that number for you, but not. I
was about to request that if you could put some guys in Excel to figure out. It would be an interesting number to look at and then get some sense going.
Sure. There's a company called Mubble. It's in our portfolio that tracks all these mobile user base, right? So I'll get them, and then if you ping me, I have my Twitter ID also there.
If you remember, Ravi had introduced us long back for
Great. Okay. Any other questions? So that's the backdrop. So that's why it's so exciting to be in India. It's a large economy, growing economy. People have expendable income, at least at the top, and then there more and more of them are coming online. Majority of them for communication, but there's a lot of them who are getting comfortable transacting online as well. And startups are starting to scale much faster than 5-6 years back. What used to take 3-4 years is happening in 1 year now, and which is a very positive sign as well. Okay. In that backdrop, I want to go into a couple of interesting sectors that Axel focuses on, and also most of the Indian investors probably focus in the same sectors, most likely subsectors of these. So consumer is probably close to half our portfolio. That is technology, using technologies to solve consumer problems. It could be online to offline companies like we spoke about Swiggy or Urban Clap or Ola, which is an early example. Many of these are mobile-led and marketplace models, which are a lot more scalable, and we can talk about any of this if there's questions in the Q&A. The second sector that we are very interested in is financial technology as it relates to improving the whole financial ecosystem. It could be infrastructure companies. We have companies like Webmo and others, and then there could be companies that are actually lending, using technology to figure out lending either on the consumer or on the SME side. So we have companies in that whole stack. Then there are companies what we call as Indian B2B. What that means is using technology again to solve problems for the Indian businesses. It could be large, medium or small Indian businesses, but how can technology impact and make them a lot more efficient and a lot more achieve a lot more scale. An example here could be a company like BlackBuck, which is in the logistics space. So you can think of them as Ola, but for the intercity logistics, for the large trucking industry. It's a $70 billion plus industry, just that, and they're trying to disrupt that using technology. And then we're going to talk about global SaaS with a case study. So, but what this means for us is a company sitting out of India and servicing the globe, not just India. So what has happened in the last 10 years is Indian engineers have become decent product managers as well. We used to be able to build the best products sitting out of India, but not be able to spec out what to build. But that has changed over the last 5 years, at least we've seen. And that's mainly because MNCs as well as companies like Zoho have helped in the Indian product managers figure out what products to build. And these people have come out as entrepreneurs and started defining products and building them for the globe. And these are companies that mostly serve the global market, which means any number of countries, including India, and any number of languages from day one. Unlike US startups that focus mainly on US first and then try to grow global, whereas these startups try to grow global from day one. And most of the sales happens over the internet. Unlike consumer products where you need a lot more confidence in the product, the SMBs mostly, or in the SaaS space, the customers mostly tend to compare products on features, not necessarily brand. And if the feature wise your product is superior and it's the same or lower cost, people tend to go with that. So that has helped a whole slew of startups from India go global, and we'll talk about Freshdesk in a short while. But there are 20 plus companies in our portfolio of 100 odd which address the global problems sitting out of India. And finally, healthcare. We're probably one of the few funds that has a very specialized focus on technology for healthcare, be it companies in the diagnostics, health, IT, or consumer-facing healthcare, or even life sciences, hardcore life sciences. We are companies across the spectrum. So on the diagnostic side, there are companies like Forus, which is an eye ophthalmology care. Right, India has 1/3 of the blind people in the world, unfortunately, and most of this is preventable blindness. So what Forus has done is come up with a roll-up device, 3-in-1. Instead of 3 devices, it's 1 device that is portable and can be operated by a minimally trained 10th standard graduate and can direct any eye issues that someone has early on, and they connect them to the closest hospital. This is one example of, again, close to 15 companies in our healthcare portfolio. Happy to talk about any of these in greater detail. Yeah.
So one more question here, and we are in an academic setup kind of Bitosa Bangalore meet, and my sector of interest is education.
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to, the problems are severe, and I understand that the solutions may not have come about. But purely on a business level and on a investment level, is there a specific reason that why education is not in this list?
So education is a sub of consumer for us. So we have tried Indian B2B, so it could be in the consumer or Indian B2B, right? So we haven't called out specific industries too much other than healthcare, because that's a separate focus area. Having said that, education is a very challenging space to invest in India. I personally done a few investments and continue to be bullish on the space, but you have to, we can just take it offline, but you have to really know how to figure out how to scale businesses in education. Unfortunately, in education, companies hit a particular scale and flatten out there, right? And the challenges of scaling, particularly in the business to business model, when you're selling to schools or colleges, is a lot, and I've blogged a little bit about this. So that is why I don't explicitly call out education as a sector of high focus area for us, but we tend to look at probably 100, 200 companies on a yearly basis in education, and might end up doing one. But if you look at our whole portfolio, we have only about 5 or 6 education companies compared to some of these other areas for the reasons I'm mentioning. Yeah. Then this is for the entrepreneurs in the room or the wannabe entrepreneurs, or if you want to join a startup, what do you look out for, right? What do investors typically look for while investing in a startup? The first and foremost thing is the team, and for this whole thing I have one case study, which is my last slide. Team as in, are these the right guys to solve this particular problem, and do they have the founders, do they have the DNA to be able to solve that particular problem? And for each of these, we'll go through the next slide, which is a case study. The second and probably the most important thing that I look at is the addressable market. When we say market for India, there's everything you can say, 1 billion people, there's a large market. But unfortunately, we pointed out earlier on, there's only about 70 million families. And even in that, maybe half, like only a fraction of them are transacting online. So if you are selling something online or through the mobile phone, right, there's probably a smaller subset of people who you can access, and how much will they spend on a yearly basis for what you're selling, right? If you do that math in India, many things boil down to be a much smaller number. Doesn't mean we won't invest, but is it small and growing fast, and is it addressable, as in can you go and achieve, go and reach those customers and make them buy your product? So all those need to work together when I talk about market. So this is probably the reason why 98% of the companies that we meet, we're not able to take it to the next level, even though the rest of the criteria, the team might be fantastic, product might be great, finance, what they need might be very little capital, so good, all that might be good, but if the market is not good, we are not able to look at those. From a venture capital investment point of view, many of these are still good, profitable businesses at probably 5, 10, 20 crores and could be profitable, but those are not the businesses. For venture capital investors to invest, the company needs to be able to scale to $50, $100 million of revenue of its own. I'm just giving a broad spectrum, which means the market needs to be $500 million to $1 billion over time, not today, but 5-7 years out. You need to be able to show that it's a big market. Obviously, India is what we discussed, like it's 70 million and 1.1 trillion plus of dollars being spent. So it's important to identify where it's being spent and go after problems, either on the consumer or businesses side, which are very large and technology can disrupt. As entrepreneurs, that's an important one. If you remember one thing, that's the one thing to remember from this slide. The other things that are important as well, like business model and traction, but these are all second order as compared to the first few things. And the final slide is the example of Freshdesk. And this is not an updated slide or anything. This is a slide from a couple of years back that I made, but still relevant to point out like what we talked about theoretically, practically, what does that mean? So from a team perspective, Girish and Shan were some senior people in a company called Zoho, which was in the SaaS, software as a service space. And Girish had built a $50 million business line as a product manager within Zoho. So he came out and identified a problem saying customer support is broken, and the best software that's available out there was one of their competitors, did not have many of the features that were needed for customer support. So he identified a product gap, defined that product beautifully, and built a prototype when he came to us. And the product demo was brilliant. and he had probably 30 to 50 non-paying customers at that time when we invested. But the team was great, the product was awesome, and most importantly, the market was already proven to be a $1 billion plus market globally. There were other data points, startups that were selling into the market to show that it is a very large market, which is what we discussed earlier on. So that's why we were excited about the model. And the business model, the market might be large, but can it scale is something is very important. The software as a service business model where people can try your software over the web, right? They can look when they search for customer support online, people will find Freshdesk. They'll start using the product just like a Gmail or anything as a free product initially, and then they get converted. That business model is called freemium. That's how they started out. And finally, the funding required was not a large amount. They needed a $1 million seed, which we are more than comfortable. The good thing about these business models in SaaS is it's very highly scalable and it's not capital intense. So that's what excites us, right? So question, yeah. Yes. Good.
Yeah, I am Kripa Shankar. I am the just 2004 pass out from BIT. I have one question, like you given the feedback regarding Zoho. I am a 2 years old from the Zoho. I am a good customer of Zoho, but there are lots of company like Zoho. I don't want to say the name. They comes in the market. They make the brand name and they try to capture, but really the service is not as for the expectation of the customers and the user. So they should try to come up on the level on the which they actually want to specify themselves different from other. You cannot tell that the Zoho can do or they can have a good future like Gmail or the Google have. So one should keep the proper mission to meet the vision. That is very, very, very important for the startup company.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the something that one should do the research after getting investment in the new startup company and to get the benefited from them.
So what is there a question or observation?
No, I am just a user, and like me, there are many HRs who use the Zoho sites for the different purpose and for the different service.
Mm-hmm.
So as you given the point, like Zoho are doing well, and they met some of the criteria of the markets in the IT field. So actually they come up like something, but they actually not on that level.
Sure. So it's a valid point. See, my point was different. So because Zohos of the world, Zoho is not Axel investment, just to be clear. I would have loved to invest in it, but the entrepreneur is adamant that he won't take venture capital money, which is obviously great. They do 200 million plus in revenue. It's a very impactful company in the Indian ecosystem. Are all their products great? I'm not vouching for that or anything like that. All I'm saying is it has generated a generation of product managers and entrepreneurs who have come out of Zoho. We were backed 4 companies like that, 4 or 5 already. And no product is perfect. It's always, it starts from MVP and keeps improving. So it's more a question of, are you figuring out, well, just like Girish identified problems in, at that time, a company called Zendesk, right? So, and built a product. But is Freshdesk the perfect products today? If you ask Girish, he'll say, no, I have to do this. So it's all up to the entrepreneur, the founding DNA, to figure out what is the market gap, build something, get it out there, get traction, and continuously innovate and build on that product, right?
Yeah,
that is important.
you.
That's the point you're saying as well.
Thank you.
Great. One question? Yeah. Good. Yeah, we'll take a couple more questions. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Hi, Anupam here.
Yes, Anupam.
My question is, I'm seeing a lot of startup coming up, like mushrooming everywhere. And I'm seeing a lot of consolidation happens, like Myntra, Jabong, you take an example. So what's the viewpoint on future of those coming startups, like mushrooming everywhere, on the consolidation space of startups?
See, I think consolidation, there's 2 questions, right? So one is, what do we think of mushrooming startups? As an investor, it's great, right? So which means we have a lot more entrepreneurs to track and invest in, which is a great thing. But the question to ask, 90% plus of startups that start out don't go on to even raise funds or get anywhere, right? So you'll have to go with eyes wide open, knowing that it's a very tough, startup is not an easy game. It tends to be binary. It can be a large outcome or it can be zero, but it's a great place to learn a lot of things. If you look at it as a learning experience, and that you'll do 2-3 startups, even if one of them succeeds, you can create a lot of opportunity, wealth, not only for yourself but for the whole ecosystem. And not everyone's got to be an entrepreneur. So if you feel that's the passion, that's the calling, go ahead and start some. So that's the first part, all right? The go in with your risks, and then the second question about consolidation or mergers and acquisitions or strategic scales. That's the nature of the startup world globally, right? Very few companies tend to go public, which is the other route of exit. Even fewer tend to be private, like we have discussed. Zoho, it continues on without venture capital and continues to be private and throw up a lot of cash. Bose is another company that stayed private and is very large. There are very few companies like that. Majority of them grow big, either go public or end up merging with one other company. So that's the nature of the startup world. And as investors, we raise money promising that we'll return it in 10 plus years. So we expect, when we invest, and we tell the entrepreneurs that we expect the exit in 5 to 7 years, right? So, and whether it's through M&A or IPO, that we can't predict, but entrepreneur goes in eyes wide open about that. Maybe one last question. Yeah, lady there.
Hi, I'm Shoma Banerjee, BID 92 batch. So when an investor comes in, there are a lot of things that we get to read. Is that the investor comes in and there is a vicious cycle of funding which comes in, and then there is a lot of pressure in terms of performance, scaling up, and all that. And there are I think cases like Fasan, iCare, and quite a few which are there, where the entrepreneurs and the founding team are either being pressed for that kind of scale which the investors are looking at, because there is an exit always hanging in the air, what you just now said, and which a lot of time probably is not good for the business from the entrepreneur's view. So there is a lot of pressure to take it to a level so that the investors can make profit and exit. And because of that pressure, or the attained to scale, which probably would have attained if there was time given. So, because of that hurry and that 5, 6, 7, the short term of the nature of the making money, so to call. So a lot of businesses are, under pressure, right? The founding team is under pressure, the model is under pressure. So, what's your view on that?
No, I think it's a very fair question. So once you take investment, the clock starts. So it's a question that every entrepreneur should ask very hard, and we also ask, is this a business that can scale in 5 to 7 years and exit? Again, 90% investments don't fit the market structure criteria, and because of that, irrespective of the team or product, we can't invest. But in the remaining 10, that's what we evaluate very carefully. Is this something that will scale in 5 to 7 years? And if not, most of the time we'll say it's not. Probably, let's take education as a sector. So Salman Khan Academy has done brilliant things, but they've done it in a non-profit model because they know it'll take 10, 15 years to impact the education ecosystem. So many education entrepreneurs, I encourage them, figure out if you're doing it for passion, is there a model in which you can do this in another funding criteria, even in a non-profit kind of a sector, till you scale it to a point where, like an SKS, which was non-profit and then had spun out of for-profit. So you can probably switch at that time if you think there is an angle of doing that. So you have to evaluate critically which sector you're in. Can it scale 5 to 7 years? And if not, don't take venture capital money, right? So even if the investors chase you, it's probably not the right thing for you. But once you take it, unfortunately, the clock starts. Right, you get raise funding for 18 to 24 months, which means you have to deliver results in 18 to 24 months and raise one more round of funding to last another 18 to 24 months. That's the nature of the venture capital funded startups. They have money for 2 years. That's probably the nature of any startup. If you fund it for 12 to 18 months, in venture capital it's probably 18 to 24. Right? How do you finance yourself beyond that is something that needs to be very clear. And is it towards profitability and sustained growth over 10, 20 years? Those kind of startups should probably refrain from taking venture capital money early on, but grow to a point where you are stabilized and either go public and go directly like that. Infosys of the world went public much sooner, or not much more directly than taking venture capital and all that. In services world, in some of the SaaS world, like in certain areas you can afford to do that and go directly public also, right? And then you have, even then you have quarterly results once you go public, right? So, or you take private equity money once you are at a scale that private equity investor will invest in, which is much later. Instead of taking money the year of inception or first, second year, you take money 5-10 years down the road from a private equity investor when you're already $10-20 million in revenue, right, and profitable. That's a great place to take money. But even when you take that, the private equity investor will say their windows are even shorter, 3 to 5 years to exit. So whenever you take money, at the end of the day, any investor is a financial manager. I've taken money from, just like you guys give your money, or each of us puts our little money in a mutual fund and expect that to perform. Whoever has invested money in us expect that money to perform and return capital. So it cannot be changed just because the right thing to do is have a 10-15 year horizon. That's not the intent of venture capital or private equity. Okay? Yeah. I think maybe last question, yeah.
Anand, I'm Hemant
Sure.
from Impego. This is regarding what's your view on the Indian market psyche for subscription-based businesses? Like in consumer is one segment you're focused on. There was a large exit recently for a consumer product company in the US called DSC, Dollar Shave Club, where they send men's.
Sure.
Yeah. What's your view about the Indian population and the psyche of, sustaining a subscription-based business? You think the population is mature enough and they go for it, or you think this subscription doesn't really work for India?
Good question. I think it's early days. I tend to be an optimist in many of these things. But having said that, the companies that have tried subscription business in India so far have not taken off. There's very few examples where you can point and say Indian consumers have agreed to pay month on month. One portion of that is the problem you're trying to solve, which is payments and all that. How do you do recurring payments in a smooth fashion? Can you have every month your credit card being billed? Actually, you can't for some reasons, right? So there are practical reasons that could be because of regulation, other reasons. But I think it's fundamentally the Indian psyche. Consumers don't want to pay in general, and don't want to pay on a regular basis for sure. What do I mean by that? If you take subscription services that have taken off in the US, it could be music, right? Spotify, Axel happens to be an investor in Spotify. It's taken off through the roof, and most people don't buy CDs or even on iTunes in the US now. They just have Spotify and listen to music anytime. Today in India, the streaming of music is very much possible. Actually, I use iTunes Match, right, in my Android phone, which is good. iTunes Apple software, right? So everything I stream, or a Saavn, or there's enough options to legally stream and listen to music, and the technology supports it also. Even with 2G, some of these services work. You don't need 4G, or 3G works great, right? So technology-wise, India is there. Mobile smartphones, 200 million of them are equipped to do it. And there's Indian services like Wynk and Gaana and all that who are trying hard to make this popular. Wynk is one of the top downloaded apps if you go and look. But the amount of people willing to pay is still low, because it's so easy to go and buy an SD card of all the music, gigabytes of music for free, right? As long as piracy is not clamped on, that might not take off. That's the unfortunate nature of the business, nature of the ecosystem in India. Similarly in video. So Netflix is launched, let's see, I use that. But there was Bigflix, I think, which was trying this even 3 years back. Maybe ecosystem wise it was early, but right now with the Jio launch and everything, I think there'll be enough bandwidth for video streaming to take off. People willing to pay money, and very little money, like 800 rupees is actually expensive if you ask me, Netflix charging. But there could be an option at 100-200 rupees to watch video on a regular basis. Will that take
any
off?
successes of software as a SaaS for business in India?
On the business side, Sorry?
In
Zoho
India.
in India, the same. If you look at the effort invested to the dollar revenue you can make, unfortunately, India is way low. So if you look at Freshdesk and others, right? So we introduce them to all our startups and ecosystem and all that. Because of that, I know the amount of questions and rigor that the Indian business puts SaaS business through to how much money they can make in return. That economics unfortunately has not played off. There are a few companies like Exotel and in a few sectors that are scaling. Tally is probably the largest in this model, right? So, but it's still comparatively a very small market. So it's unfortunate to say this, but if it's only India B2B SaaS company, we find it very tough to invest. We haven't invested in any that are only in that model as yet. It's not to say we will not invest, but we need to see more signs that these kind of companies can get to $50-100 million when Tally itself is not that scale. That gives us the we are a little bit scared. So it'll go down to the previous question asked. We'll invest and we'll force the guys to scale in a market which is not scalable. I think that's about I overshot the time, but I really enjoyed the interactions. Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah.